Hello, it's the last session of the day. We've had a really long day. So I'd like to start. If you would be kind enough to take your seats, and then we can start. Thank you so much. So I will be moderating this final plenary roundtable for the day. Thank you for those who've been here since the morning. It's been a really great day. So I'd like to propose that I would first invite the rapporteurs from the two breakout groups to report back to us. After that, I will invite the representative from St. Kitts and Nevis to, as a lead discussant. She will speak for 3 minutes. Following that, I will open the floor for comments, Q&A, and then we'll wrap up by quarter past 6. Is that acceptable to everyone? All right. Seeing no violence objections, I propose that we start. But before we do, please allow me just to make a few remarks reflecting on today's meeting, well, our opening session today. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, the Honorable Prime Minister of the Bahamas raised some very important points this morning, and I take this opportunity to first express my sincere appreciation for the Prime Minister's esteemed presence, as well as for sharing his country's experience and challenges. The organizers have provided a number of important questions about policy integration and implementation. But before we dive into those matters, I would like to add one overarching question of my own. And that's, why is this time different? As we all know, we've had the Barbados Plan of Action, the Mauritius Strategy of Implementation. Now we have the SAMOA pathway. We had the MDGs, and now we have the SDGs. We had the NAMAs under the Cancun Agreement, and now we have NDCs under the Paris Agreement. So why is this time different? I think this is an important question because if we repeat the same exercise as in the past, we shouldn't be surprised if we get the same lackluster outcomes. I believe the Honorable Prime Minister gave us an important cautionary tale this morning, and I reiterate my thanks for sharing with us. I think we need to take these stories like these very seriously. Therefore, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, I am looking forward to hearing examples of how the new paradigm we have ushered in can deliver on its priorities so that I can take these lessons home and explain to my government why this time it will be different. Thank you, and on that note, I will invite the rapporteurs from the breakout groups first. I will invite Ms. Rubina Budhu to report back. Thank you very much. Ma'am, you have the floor.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I was rapporteur for Group 1, which was looking at supporting integrated and risk-informed implementation of 2030 Development Agenda and the SAMOA pathway in SIDS. And the points made were that SIDS are not unique, yet each small island developing state has its own unique characteristics. And so each SIDS has its own unique ways of implementing the different agendas. The main risk for SIDS is linked to climate change, which disproportionately magnify disaster risk. SIDS challenges call for a risk-informed approach to development, making investment in disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation key priorities. The various agendas or frameworks are complementary and mutually reinforcing, ensuring coherence across and making it easier for countries to implement them. There is alignment of national or sustainable development plans and the different agendas. We saw the presentations of Jamaica and Guyana and heard of Vanuatu. These countries had integrated the SDGs in their national or sustainable development plans. There is alignment also between regional plans and Agenda 2030, the climate change agreement, the Sendai framework, and the SAMOA pathway, for example, within the framework for resilient development in the Pacific. On the issue of mechanisms to allow the development and implementation of integrated policies and plans, we found that there is need for wide consultations with all stakeholders on developing the national or sustainable development plans. There is need to link this national or sustainable development plan to the budget to ensure implementation. Interministerial working groups or committees were set up are cross-cutting and involve all stakeholders, thus addressing the silo issue. Some of the working groups include membership at the highest political level. There is coherence between the different agendas, example in terms of shared indicators. And the Sendai Framework Monitoring Instrument, for example, has been developed in coordination with instruments for tracking progress in SDGs. Disaggregated data are required. Countries can start where they can if they cannot measure all the indicators at once and build up as they go along. On the issue of incorporation of risk related to climate, disasters, and economic and other shocks in policy making, points made were integrated policies and monitoring mechanisms such as shared data are required. Climate change and disaster risk need to be mainstreamed across sectors. There is need for strengthening and building partnership for resilience across all stakeholder groups. And inclusive processes for resilience building need to be facilitated. On the capacities needed in the public sector, private enterprises, and civil society organizations to incorporate those agendas, policies, and plans, the points made were that capacities and resources are limited to translate integrated approaches into national and sectoral planning and local actions. There is need for institutional support and to increase or make more efficient use of resources to translate integrated approaches into national and sectoral planning and local actions. We need to improve scientific tools to inform hazard, vulnerability, and risk assessments. We need to improve data collection, analysis, and communication to the public. There is need for long-term data that show the link between different goals. And there is need to improve avenues for national and subnational agencies to link information to evidence-based planning and decision-making that take into account climate and disaster risk. We heard that UNITA is willing to assist with capacity building, among others, in statistical capacity building, satellite image analysis, and tools for crowdfunding. On the issue of leadership that is required to put in place coordinated, integrated, and risk-informed policies and plans and build the necessary capacity, we found that there is need for strong political leadership and commitment to the different agendas, and that the toughest challenge is to change the mindset to be able to move from conceptualization to reality. We also need to identify accelerators, that is, identify measures that would produce synergies and cross-sectoral benefits with the potential to speed up progress. We need also to improve cooperation between various agencies and departments at national and regional levels. Coordinated efforts should lead to more efficient use of resources. We found that advocacy is important and that there is need to involve local communities to endogenize the different agendas. There is need also to mobilize support of development partners and international community and to find innovative financing mechanisms for development funding. And finally, we need to ensure political continuity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Boodoo, for that report back, for your very comprehensive presentation. I hope you all got that. But if you haven't, I'm sure Ms. Boodoo will be most happy to share it. I would now like to invite the rapporteur from the second group, Dr. Suka Mangisi, to make his presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And I had the pleasure to take notes and to report back on the second outbreak group. And this group is what you would call in Australian language a doozy. It was very, very complex with so much technical information. And I've done my best to try and capture what I think was projected and delivered. But I think my thoughts also have combined with what I heard through statements this morning from the Honourable Prime Minister and speakers who also spoke on issues which pervade the three questions that Group 2 had to address. And I'll just speak to it very quickly. The guiding questions that our group sought to answer were: one, what are the main areas where lack of policy coherence negatively impacts on the situation of SIDS? Two, what has worked nationally and internationally to improve policy coherence? And the third and last question, what can SIDS government do to minimize the impacts of de-risking? A full and probably more complete report will be handed out tomorrow afternoon, I understand. But these are just some preliminary remarks. On the first question, what I gathered, I gathered 5 main points that were given. First is the proper alignment of international to national goals. Second, policy implementation. Third, policy impacts evaluation. Fourth, mandates and processes. And 5, political interests. On the first heading, proper alignment of international to national goals, what I understood was the need for a contextualization of goals and targets that are set at the international level. We found that it's sometimes a challenge when deciding, for example, resource allocations and designing planning frameworks at the national level of SIDS. Now, the possible reasons are countered by maybe a lack of a framework that has to be in place first to carefully transition a SIDS in understanding and aligning the international commitments within an appropriate time frame into the context of the country's capacity to effectively implement them. So that leads on to the second heading, policy implementation. What I understood was that with each stakeholder within the process, for example, line ministries, each line ministry, they're guided by their own mandates. And when I say that, everyone just automatically thinks of silos. So within their own mandates, you have your limited resources available, which are used primarily to drive their own implementation of activities with the mentality of they'll address theirs first versus considering other key stakeholders' views that are involved, particularly in the policy design and implementation phases. So this results in what we may have as a non-coherent approach towards achieving similar goals, leading to unnecessary costs and duplication of efforts. Third heading, policy impacts evaluation. The scope of carefully examining and evaluating the combined impact of government policies, I understand, or what I took is quite limited. And this appears to stem from a lack of capacity available to properly conduct required evaluations of policy impacts, starting from its designing phase in terms of identifying its possible trade-offs and opportunities that the policy envisages. Now, this doesn't just occur at the SIDS level, but also at the international level, where some partners, for example, do not properly consider the actual concerns at the national level and its possible impacts. And then this usually leads to a lot of failures within project designs. Fourth, on the mandates and processes, some of the mandates that govern the operations of government sometimes either duplicate or oppose one another, but could also stem from different interpretations of these mandates. For instance, one may demand the appropriate accountability of funds or the process for determining the hiring of human resources, whereas another may state total independence and entailing their own reporting, procuring, and hiring processes. So in effect, this usually undermines the process for attaining agreed upon policy objectives. And the last heading under the first question, political interests. Having strong political will and leadership is what I heard is vital for backing the effectiveness of implementing policies. But the issue arises when there are differing political interests among policy decision makers. This leads to resources, of course, being inefficiently spread among various interests that, if not coordinated well, they end up in results that benefit a few, if any, among the policy decision makers. This leads to resources being inefficiently spread among various interests that, if not coordinated well, end up in results that benefit a few. On the second question, what has worked nationally and internationally to improve policy coherence? What I gathered, I jotted down three headings. One is what can be termed a joint policy reform matrix. Second, the need for regular donor partner forums or consultations. And third, capacity building projects. On the first heading of at the regional level, I understood from the speaker from the Pacific Island Forum, there's a mapping and a matrix that lists policy actions supporting regional development, which has been or is being worked on. Sorry, I may have missed a particular point. But what I understand, it aims to strengthen coherence of policy efforts by partners and aligning them with Pacific SIDS efforts in pursuing sustainable development. That is to attempt non-duplication of efforts and resources momentum from others following the successful policy coherence method. Second, on the regular donor partner forums or consultations, I understood that the aim of this sort of meeting is to bring together development partners to discuss what has been implemented and the prospects for more coordination in terms of ensuring sustainable development through aid effectiveness measures. And finally, on the capacity building projects, since projects that tend to upskill the capacity of local officials in the context of the recipient country tends to be successful, particularly once a project finishes, it is ensured that there's proper transfer of the knowledge gained into day-to-day implementation of the nation's interests. And this goes both ways also, where the donor countries have their resources invested gain greater returns when the implementing arms of their projects are strengthened with the appropriate capacity and skills. On the final question of what can SIDS governments do to minimize the impacts of de-risking, this was the worst question that a lowly diplomat like myself could try and report on, but here goes. I gathered 5 headings, very technical. The first was to establish a framework for transitioning international to national planning frameworks. 2, capacity building in policy planning and implementation. 3, capacity building in policy impacts evaluation. 4th, streamline mandates and processes, and finally, again, political interests. On the first point, to establish a framework for transitioning international to national planning frameworks, Through the coordination and collaboration between development partners and governments, this proposed framework can assist in carefully transitioning the country into understanding and aligning international commitments within an appropriate timeframe into the context of the country's capacity to effectively implement them. This should involve, as mentioned, the contextualization of goals, targets, and indicators to help align government and sectoral plans in achieving national and international goals. On the second heading of capacity building and policy planning implementation, again, despite line ministries having separate mandates in the SIDS, the capacity to which each ministry is able to plan and design policies ought to be strengthened. And this strengthening exercise needs to be led by a central planning agency with close coordination among other arms of government, so that the efforts will be uniform towards aligning activities and achieving the nation's overall plan. In addition, strengthening, for example, data collection offices, statistics departments to collect and analyze information that will be integrated into monitoring and evaluating framework for the government. So this will result, of course, in a more coherent approach towards achieving similar goals, leading to reduction of unnecessary cost and duplication. Third, in the heading of capacity building and policy impacts evaluation. Evaluation matters, of course, to the public welfare, since opinion drives policy. And evaluation has the potential for enriching opinion with knowledge and enhancing the accountability of decision makers for results. Evaluation capacity, if built appropriately, should be able to determine trade-offs and potential synergies for pursuing better policy coherence in support of not only national but international agreed development goals. Fourth, to streamline mandates and processes. Some of the mandates that govern the operations of government need proper assessment for careful streamlining to reduce processes that either duplicate or oppose one another, but also to modernize and standardize interpretations of these mandates. This can also be extended to understanding and mainstreaming international processes into those at the national level. And finally, Madam Chair, political interests. Of course, having strong political will and leadership is vital for backing the effectiveness of implementing policies. But governments need to regularly strengthen its partnership, of course, with other arms of government, such as parliaments. Evidently, interest at that level, if well coordinated, will be an effective tool in advocating the nation's plan and strategies. This will lead to resources being more efficiently spread among coherent policy interests and gaining more sustainable returns. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Dr. Mengistu, for that very comprehensive presentation. So I would now like to invite the representative of St. Vincent and the Grenadines as our lead discussant to make a presentation. Ma'am, you have 3 minutes. Thank you.
When do we start counting? Okay, thank you very much. And we have already established protocol from since earlier this morning, so I wouldn't go into all that. Okay, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, for those of you who don't know, we are in Southern Caribbean. We are also part of the Organization of the Eastern Caribbean States, and we are also the most beautiful in the Caribbean. So it's some place you have to see. We have everything everybody has plus. Now, the way we went about our development plan, it was a labor of love, stress, joy, and happiness at the end when it was completed. But we started out, one of the things that we remember when we had all of our consultations, we started out using this proverb. It's a well-known proverb, and I like the King James Version, Proverb 29:18, where it says, where there is no vision, the people perish. Now, we didn't want to be in a position where our children and our grandchildren would judge us and say, well, you did nothing, and therefore, this is where what you have left us. St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Another thing that we found coming out for us, one of the reasons we had to come up with a plan is that we had all sorts of things. Nothing was, well, I shouldn't say nothing. Cohesion was not something that we were accustomed to doing. So everybody did what they were doing. We had duplication, and we just were not doing what we were supposed to be doing in an efficient manner. And hence the reason for the plan. But there were some things that were very important to us and that were frightening for us. For instance, our poverty rate was assessed at 30.2%. And if you think that was bad, our vulnerability index was assessed at 48%. And for us, that was like sounding the warning bells that, you needed to have something and do it properly. Another thing for us, I wouldn't go over the whole thing with climate change because we all know that, but I want to leave a statistic here with you. It's the only thing I do today. And between 1941 and 2007, we had coastal erosion measuring 80 meters in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, in the northeastern part of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, which is bathed by the Atlantic Ocean. So we had a number of things riding on why we needed to have a proper plan. So we came up with a vision, re-engineering economic growth, improving the quality of life for all Vincentians. Remember I said that we had this whole thing about dealing with poverty, and therefore we knew that everything that we did was everything related to poverty was, back up a bit, so you have to subtract that time, right? So everything that we did was going to reduce poverty and ensure that our citizens enjoyed a better quality of life. And I will go through five overarching goals that we came up with. We call them our strategic goals. And they were: 1, re-engineering economic growth; 2, enabling increased human and social development; 3, promoting good governance and increasing the effectiveness of public administration; 4, improving physical infrastructure, preserving the environment, and building resilience to climate change; and 5, building national pride, identity, and culture. Now, you may wonder how we came up with these. Now, as I said, it was a labor of love, stress, and everything that you could roll into one. So we had a number of consultations throughout the length and breadth of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. We also went into North America, where we had fairly large pockets of Vincentians. We went into the Caribbean as well, so we touched on places like Trinidad and Tobago, Barbados, the British Virgin Islands, and also we targeted the university students from UWI. Is everybody here? Oh, okay. So that took a while. So by 2013, we came up with the National Economic and Social Development Plan, and it was supposed to have taken us to 2025. Then along came the Sustainable Development Goals, and we discovered that while our plan to a large degree incorporated about 80% of what the SDGs had, we still had some gaps, and those are the gaps that we needed to fill. And so in response to that, we have what the government created, the Ministry of Economic Planning, Sustainable Development, and some other things that were added on to it. So we, which is the ministry which I come from, we had that responsibility to coordinate all development activities, certainly economic and of course sustainable development. Now, the economic part is easy because that's what we have been accustomed to doing. The sustainable development part, we know it's going to be a little more challenging, because I know in one of the sessions, somebody spoke about changing habits. How do you get people to change from doing things that they were doing all the time before? And that is something that we are working with. And we are beginning to see some positive results from that. We plan to complete in 2018 a mapping exercise, which I alluded to, where I said that we looking at the gaps and trying to make sure that we capture everything that we could. We believe that we know, because we have done it before, that it should not be as difficult this time around, because at least experience is on our side. And another way that we want to approach it is that we want to have 17 champions for each of the goals. And these champions are not necessarily within in the public sector, but also would include non-state actors. Because we felt that for there to be effective buy-in, you would need to have everybody involved in the process. And in terms of monitoring the implementation of the SDGs, we are also going to propose, we have proposed to Cabinet, so we have to get their blessing, that we have a multidisciplinary team which will be drawn from different sectors within the economy to monitor the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goal. But like everybody else, we have done quite a number of things without formalizing the whole mapping exercise and everything. And for instance, we spoke in the current National Development Plan, we spoke about having a climate change policy, and we are on track to having that completed. And we also doing our MRVs with assistance from the UNDP through funding from the European Union. I think we and Barbados are the two Caribbean countries that are involved in that project. So there are a number of things. We are also doing other things like trying to include the climate change agenda in the school curricula at both the primary and the secondary, because we also figure that it's not just something for those of us who are in the offices, it's something for all of us in the country. And also from the building codes, we are looking at strengthening our building codes to bolster the aspects that deal with the climate change, because apart from the hurricanes and so, we have been having some strange weather events in terms of troughs. We have been having, for the last 2-3 years, we have had, well, 3 years, we have had trough systems which have done more damage to our economy than hurricanes have. Not that we're asking for the hurricanes, but it's just to show you that these things are a real problem for us. We had a trough system in 2013, December, and we suffered damage worth 15% of our GDP. That's in one go. And the following year, we had another trough system, and in 2016, we had 2 trough systems in 1 month, and the damage was over 10% of our, just about 10% of our GDP. So these are some of the things that we are dealing with. How do you advise people to build, where to build, if to build? And so, you know, that comes with its own challenges as well. Another thing that we have done, which I think I want to speak about here, is having, one of the things we touted was that we wanted to reduce our reliance on fossil fuel for obvious reasons. And we are vigorously exploring that. We are in the process of seeing how much we can get from our, you know, well, you may or may not know, but we have a volcano. It is dormant for now, and we pray that it stays dormant, but it has treasures untold beneath. So we are hoping to tap into those treasures so that we can get energy. That would be in St. Vincent proper. And in the Grenadines, we are exploring solar. In fact, by the end of the second quarter of this year, we plan to have a solar PV on one of the Grenadine islands of Bequia. So even though we don't have the SDGs formalized, we still think and we still know that we are doing what we need to do as it relates to the SDGs and to ensuring that the quality of life is improved for all Vincentians. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deputy Director, for that presentation and for sharing your vision and your challenges, and we wish you all the very best in the days ahead. So we finished that part of our of what we want to achieve this afternoon. So I'm going to open the floor now for comments and Q&A. For questions, I will also invite the moderators from the two breakout groups to respond to your Q&A, but I'm going to open the floor now. Please make your interventions brief, succinct, and floor is open. I'm happy to wrap it up now if no one wants to take the floor. I mean, hey, it's 5:45. I'll ask again, and if this time no one takes the floor, we're going to call it a day. Excellencies, oh, Cape Verde, okay, Cabo Verde. Thank you for taking the floor.
Okay, I'll break the ice. I'm sure that someone else will follow after me. Thank you, moderator, for giving me the floor. And since this is the first time I'm taking floor in this plenary, I would like to thank the government of Bahamas for hosting this very important meeting, at least for Cape Verde point of view, because we are in the middle of the process of elaborating our national plan for sustainable development. And this meeting couldn't be more timing, because I'm sure that a lot of experience that I've been hearing here will help us a lot moving forward in our process. Distinguished delegates, at the end of the day, what counts most is access to finance. You could have the most fascinating, the most integrated, holistic plan, but if you don't have access to finance, and then your plan will be worse. That's for sure. Dealing with sustainable development and finance and climate change issues, you hear a lot, and then we all know that seeds are special, seeds are vulnerable and fragile countries. And then when it comes to access to finance, it's not that clear that we have this access. Even though it's climate change is a little bit more defined in terms of how we access to finance, and because we are vulnerable. But even though we cannot say that the access to finance is easy, because it's not. And then it's even hard when you are middle-income countries, that it's kind of, you are punished twice. You're punished by the nature for being vulnerable, and then this is the nature of working, especially when we talk about climate change. And then you're punished by an international financial institution that does not, you're vulnerable, but when you try to access to finance, you're not that vulnerable again. So my provocation is, okay, we know we're vulnerable, we know we're special, but what we will do to have a better access? I mean, I think it's kind of, we are at the point that it's not enough to say we are special. It's not enough to say that we need access to finance. It's what we're gonna do. How are we creating criteria, modalities to assess and to tap into finance, climate change finance, development finance? What are we going to do? Instead of always saying that we're vulnerable, we're special, when we need access to finance, we all say that. We all hear this in every meetings that we go, United Nations meetings, every meetings that we go about climate change, we hear that, we know that. But what are we going to do to enhance and to strengthen access to finance for our country. Thank you.
Thank you, Cabo Verde. Let me recognize the delegation from Cuba, and then, yes, Cuba, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you very much, Madam Ambassador. It's a pleasure to have you there chairing this meeting. Since this is also the first time that I take the floor, I would like also to thank the government of the Bahamas and as well as UNDESA for hosting together this very important and timely meeting. Madam Chair, you made a very good question when you were introducing this this discussion early in the afternoon. That were about was something about what would you like to say or you could say to your government about the shift in paradigm about this meeting and about what is difference from here and from the SDGs and the agenda and the MDGs. So I was very happy to hear about that because what we really need is a shift in paradigm in which we are addressing the agenda and the SDGs. I participated in the group too, the one who was making Mr. From Tonga that was wrapping up the working group, and I made two questions because I think that is very timely and also is close to what Cabo Verde was saying, and it's very simple. The Secretary General of UNCTAD in the morning said that China made a very good progress in the implementation of NDGs because they provide economic empowerment to the people, to their people. But the difference between China and SIDS is, very huge. Not just about population, not just about territory, but China in this moment is the first economy in the world. The first of the second, we can discuss that. This is not the issue. The issue is that China have the resources to provide to their own people the resources, but this is not the case for many of the seats. Also, UNCTAD in 2014 released a report about how many trillion of dollars the developing countries, not just seats, developing countries need to implement the SDGs and the agenda. And annually, they say that a developing country needs around 3.9 trillion annually of investment annually for developing countries to implement SDGs and the agenda. And we know that almost all 3.9 million doesn't go for developing for seats, but mainly for all the developing countries. So seats, almost all those resources are not. We cannot achieve almost of those resources. So, Madam Chair, the shift of paradigm that Cuba is proposing here that is very timely, and I think that we need to do that, is about changing how the Bretton Woods institutions are working. So this is something that we need to address here, and perhaps in the high-level political forum, perhaps in the FSD forum in the UN. So we needed to shift how the Bretton Woods institutions are working and how we can empower seats and developing countries in those institutions. So how we can, as seats, be heard in those institutions, or of challenges, or of, vulnerability are addressed there, and how we can get the money that exists in the world. For example, annually in military investment, the investment in military and so on is about 3 trillion. So how many issues we can do in our countries if we can use a little bit part of the $3 trillion usually to military expenditure in the world? How much of sustainable development we can do? The other international institution that needs to be changed or needs to make some arrangement to address the seats vulnerability and so on is the WTO. So how trade could be taken into account, the global trade, or how the WTO could give a fair treatment to seats and about the resources and about everything. So we can spend the whole 3 days here discussing about planning in our country, about how we can integrate the SDGs agenda and the Paris Agreement and everything in our national development plans, but without the money, but without the economic growth, will be very difficult for us to implement the SDGs and the agenda at the very end, at the 2030, because there is no way. We can say that, for example, we can turn our economies toward a green-based economy. We can say that we need to move from fossil oil economy toward sustainable development and, sustainable energy. But where are the resources? Where are the technology needed to do that? So that's why the only way I think that we can do that is shifting and changing how the world is working right now. When I mean the world, I mean the UN, I mean the WTO, and I mean the Bretton Woods institution. Otherwise, we can spend, the coming 15 years discussing the same, what we can do in our country, but the money won't appear. The private sector is not the solution at all. To finish, I will put you a very simple example in Cuba. We need, annually to implement the National Development Plan that is very aligned with the 2030 agenda. We need annually $2 billion of investment, direct investment. And in the portfolio that we provided, one of the main important points is sustainable energy. And to Cuba came a country, I won't say the name, with their private sector and so on, and they were very interested in providing investment to sustainable energy, about $2 million of investment to provide the 25% of sustainable energy that we want for 2030. And they say, okay, and how Cuba is going to pay for that investment? The government said, well, okay, we can, access for credit. And they say, no, it's not right. We need the money. We have two options. The government, the second one, go directly to the population, and the population of Cuba will be the one who pay. And the Cuban government say, no. Okay, the energy in Cuba is subsidized by the government, so the people won't pay you. What we can do is to arrange something with you for the government to pay. And they say, no, we need the money if we want to invest the 20 million. So this is a clear example how the private sector, at least, is not the solution. The solution is to change the paradigm, to work to something about solidarity, to work toward a new international economic order. So this is at least how we see that if we want to implement the 2030 agenda, Madam Chair, and based on what you say about the paradigm shift that perhaps we need to recommend to the high-level political forum and to FFD forum this year to discuss about this issue, not just how at the national level, but how at the international level we can do that. Thank you very much. I'm sorry for taking your time.
Muchas gracias, Cuba. I'm going to Ambassador. Ambassador, are you putting your hand up? So I am going to give the floor to the Ambassador of Samoa, and then we'll head over there. Ambassador, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. I mean, like our colleague from Cuba, you posed a question, what is different this time around? I think the obvious difference, one, with the MDGs, I think those were basically imposed on us. And I think one of the other features of the MDG was that they were mainly for developing countries. They were goals that we were meant to achieve. Now, in terms of the SDGs, I think we were very much active participants in the negotiation of the SDGs. And I think somebody made the observation in one of the groups that now it applies to everybody. It's not just developing countries. And I think there is also some similarity when you look at the Kyoto Protocol. It was very much like the North and South compared to the Paris Agreement, where everybody is, or at least the agreement is meant for everyone has a role to play. What do I mean by this? I think, it's human nature. If you become part of the process, if you were involved in the decision-making process, there is also a tendency for you to try and ensure that you also get to benefit out of it. Because my observation, just listening to all the presentations this morning and some of the interventions this afternoon, is that I think the SIDS are very proactive in trying to integrate the SDGs into their own national strategies. My neighbor from St. Vincent and Grenadines also make the observation that simply because even if you haven't done it already, this is something we've been doing all the times. I think the SDGs, no, we only adopted them, a year or 2 years ago, but our governments have been trying all this time to address the very needs of society. So whether you wanted to, whatever name you call your strategic plan at the time, I think it doesn't really matter, because at the end of the day, as I said earlier in my presentation, all these are important global frameworks, but it's how serious leadership at the national level take them and try and integrate them so that there is some relevance to the people on the floor. And I think one aspect of the SDG, which the MGGs also have, there is an inbuilt competitiveness in it. I distinctly remember my own Prime Minister, during the MDGs, he kept asking me, so when is the prize giving day? I said, what do you mean? He said, no, because with the MDGs, I mean, you have a scorecard, and you try and compare yourself to your neighbor, but it's like a positive incentive. You are comparing yourself to yourself. So if our neighbor is doing better than us, why are we off track? So I think, I think that is the positive takeaway. We look at the MDGs, and I think there was reference in the other group about policy coherence at the regional level. I think this is to be admired, but again, at the end of the day, it's how you do your own work on the ground. And I think we can also say that small can be beautiful. Why? Because some of the policies that it's very difficult to try and at least agree and even implement them on the ground, it's much easier when you are a small island state. And I think linked to that is the need for political leadership. Because I heard some people lamenting the fact that it is very difficult for interdepartmental to be singing from the same hymn sheet. But if there is the political will, I can, for instance, like what the Prime Minister of Bahamas said earlier this morning, I can see the political will basically, well, I think instructing is too strong a word, but taking leadership in terms of where do we want our country to be in the next 5 or 20 years or so. And that way, the public servants, the public service, hopefully you'll be able to deliver and be able to come on board. So I just want to share this because I think we're always saying that as small as we are, it's very difficult for us to access resources. But I think let's not forget that, and I think this is a challenge to our partners. I think because everything is relative in life. And even $100,000 project, that's a drop in the ocean for some of the well-resourced and some of the bigger developing countries. But that amount can have a transformational impact on the ground. For small communities, a community that may have never had drinking water supplies before, or even electricity for that matter. So I think this is, we would encourage our partners to try and view things, because at the end of the day, small as they may be, they may also have, and I think in absolute terms, some of this assistance can be really transformational on the ground. So thank you, Madam Moderator.
Thank you, Ambassador of Samoa, for your comments. All I can add is small can be beautiful, but I reckon big is more beautiful. So anyone else for the floor? Madam Decima, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Excellency. It's a pleasure to have you here in our region. I may be saying the obvious, but I just wanted to reflect a little bit on what I've heard today, and just to make 3 points. The first reflection has already been said, that in fact there is action across all the reporting member states so far, and that is really welcome news, and it's good news, because it's a 15-year journey we're only a year, a little over a year on the road to 2030. And we should applaud ourselves that there is tremendous movement. The other thing about the movement is that it's very diverse. And so it conforms to the notion of responding in our specific national capacities. I heard, for example, this morning, the Bahamas, Commonwealth of the Bahamas, speaking grandly about Vision 2040, you know, a very deliberate, well thought out, methodical process. We heard from St. Kitts and Nevis that they're still meeting with young people under the trees, young fellows on the block, that they want to work with women and girls. We heard from St. Vincent that they're approaching theirs in a less articulated way around the nomenclature of the 2030 agenda, but they're proceeding nonetheless. We heard from Grenada that they're also taking a vision of incrementalism, incremental progress, incremental rewards, but progress nonetheless. So I think we also heard, for example, from SAMOA, you know, the grandfather of the SAMOA pathway, that they are really geared up and they have integrated, and as the SIDS representative on the board of the Green Climate Fund, they've got an inside ring seat that many of us don't have, and so they could share that experience with us. So I think the SIDS are not doing too badly for 18 months, more or less, and I think that's the first message that I've taken from today that I'll take back to New York. However, the second message is, and it has been so sharply articulated by Cuba and others before Cuba, that in fact, though we have progress, we have deep financial capacity deficits, and those are not to be ignored. And the resonance of that was first put on the table by the Prime Minister this morning. I responded like you. I've heard that welled up recurring frustration so much before from our leaders, and what shall we do? Why are we here? Where are we? What can we do? You know, your question is so pertinent, and it brings out the frustration that we need to bring forward, and therefore, what shall we do? And I'm only representing a UN politician, so in that vein, I can respond to suggest the three proposals that he's put on the table. The first one I propose is to come to New York with that frustration on the 18th of April. Bring it up there, because we've put on the table for you an opportunity for a dialogue around financing, making the need and the resources meet. If your case, Cuba, is indicative, we need to hear that, and we need to be guided by it. But we've got to engage altogether, public and private, because the one has the need and the one has the means. We've got to wrestle together to make progress on the gaps. And the second opportunity, has been mentioned by someone, is in fact the high-level political forum. That is where the statement has to be made, that we're not really, as a group of islands, 40 members of the United Nations. We're not making the kinds of progress that we need to make if the agenda itself is to be taken as a success, never mind our own individual success. And that message has to be put on the table of the high-level political forum well before we get into our third and fourth and fifth year, and there is this sense that business as usual is going to take us successfully to 2030. If in fact it's the will of the region, the global region of the SIDS, that the momentum is either not adequate, not in the right direction, Madam Moderator, I submit that that message be taken this year, right away, not wait to see. And the third possibility for taking it forward is in the series of thematic debates that are already on the table for the rest of the year, before we get into a new General Assembly. I mean, we've got the Oceans Forum coming up, we've got the Climate Change Forum coming up. These are areas that we can have incremental progress, what I call thematic progress. We may get something on fisheries in the Oceans Conference. We might get something on adaptation in the climate change meeting. And perhaps incrementalism isn't such a bad thing in the context of multilateralism. You know, short of the revolution, we take the evolution, because the evolution helps to propel the revolution. So I think we have to walk on all fronts, and we are many, and we are clear, and we are a community. And I underscore the implicit point of my colleague, our colleague from SAMOA, Ambassador Faturi, that in fact there are many opportunities, many crevices, many openings through which we can walk boldly and strongly, having done our homework and having our collective agenda. Sorry to take so long. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Williams. So I can't see your Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, while thanking the government of Bahamas for this great opportunity to bring nations together before the high-level political forum, let me also reiterate that during the course of the day, very surprisingly, I did not hear the word of transformation, and the Agenda 2030 had been referred to without any reference to a comprehensive transformation that 193 leaders were brought into, signed on to. Why I'm stating this at the end of the day is that while all the optimism for the next 14 years is being echoed, and I do join the party in that, but to bring together the memory that Agenda 21, when it was signed before, Maurice Strong, as the Secretary General of the Rio 1990 conference, declared that it was the last chance to save the earth. When we came to Rio plus 20 years later, it was declared that we had absolutely no political commitment to implement that. And the political commitment to implement that meant that we did not put our finances where the agreements were. And this continues to do so. So financing is fundamentally important. And while as much as there's no implementation mechanism that is attached to the SDGs process globally and leaving all nations to figure it out how to do it, and then a reporting process without a clear-cut structure places a lot of groundwork to be done. Also, we need to bring into the context that the prevailing inequities between countries and the trading regimes and the economic models are not very positive towards a collective agenda. And the agenda for sustainable development, the 2030 agenda for transformation, is not, I mean, if we are to believe that is the only agenda on earth, and we do want to believe that that is the only agenda on earth, and countries must come together, and the high-level political forum must demonstrate a greater commitment and vigor in its deliberations rather than going through the motions of reporting and without a clear monitoring mechanism. And that is something that I hope that the next 2 days will deliberate on, and some of the efforts that we are making in our part of the world into creating widespread clarity on the process and making sure that from the legislative to the implementing structures, institutional structures, are geared towards adopting and implementing what we are talking. So I would request that we move on to, and I heard Cuba very loudly and clearly as well, and much appreciated, that we must now as a world order move on and embrace that we are not just talking about 17 SDGs, 169 targets with 241 indicators. We are talking about transformation, and the transformation will have to come with diversity, but with collectivity as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sri Lanka. So we have about 5 minutes left, and I'm going to give it to Mr. Wu, and then I will to the gentleman over there who's been waiting patiently. Thank you, Mr. Wu, you have the floor.
Well, thank you very much, and the discussions are getting more interesting. I think most of the speakers concentrate on the financing for development. I think this is a very important issue. When the member states negotiating Agenda 2030, they have in mind for the first time what they call means of implementation. Means of implementation was absent during the Millennium Development Goal, MDGs. So we find that sometimes people in given countries think we can do something, we want to do something, but we have no money. This still remains the situation in some other countries, and the lack of funds is a serious challenge. So what we mean by means of implementation, this is the SDG 17. It will be reviewed at the global level every year. So first point I wish to make is this is not forgotten internationally. Member states sitting together once a year in July, they will discuss this issue. Now, when we talk about means of implementation, broadly speaking, we cover three areas. First is the financing. Second is the science, technology, innovation. It's transfer of technology, availability of technology for sustainable development. Third is capacity building. We have been referring to so far about the data and the statistics. This is part of a capacity building. So talking about the first, financing. Globally speaking, this is not forgotten. One of the deliverables from AAAA, that is Addis Ababa Action Agenda, is that under ECOSOC, there will be a financing for development forum every year. It happens in April, very soon. The United Nations has a task team mobilizing as many as 50 UN entities. We prepare every year a very thick and comprehensive report on all the areas identified by AAAA. Not only the progress we measured, but the gaps still remaining, and the way forward we're going to suggest. So this is the forum that the member states stay together to discuss how we can bring forward the financing for development. To be more specific, and when we talk about financing, we have to rely on ourselves. That's the first priority. You cannot rely completely on others. We are talking about access to financing, but the better way to describe it is to forge partnership, as we launched in the SAMOA pathway and the conference. First of all, we need to rely on the public financing of the domestic government. Is that enough? The answer is no, absolutely no. Even for developed countries, the public financing is limited. But the public financing can play a vital role. That is to provide policy guidance and also investment that will show the way to the private sectors. This is the way forward for the future. You know, some of the enterprises, they are profit-oriented, and they are concentrating on short-term benefits. But from a long point of view, with the implementation of Sustainable Development Agenda, some of the profitable enterprises will lead to no future. If the governments could provide them with guidance, with some investment to ensure that they will proceed in the right direction, sooner or later, you will find a lot of financial support will come your way. And international financing is also very important. For instance, ODA. Many countries are still qualified for ODA. we're going to urge very, very strongly that those countries commit themselves to the 0.7% of GNI will fulfill their targets as early as possible. At the same time, we have to think about other international financing. For instance, the investment cooperation with the multinational banks, both international or regional. And also South-South cooperation is a way of doing a lot of help for all of us. STI, we cannot catch up with those countries who are ahead of us in the traditional way. We need science, technology, innovation. This is another mandate given by the AAAA. That is the United Nations Economic and Social Development, the Social Affairs Department, my department, UNDESA, has been mandated to organize an online platform. This is being considered, being prepared. The online platform is a two-way interactive in nature. Those who are in possession of the right technology, innovations, would put them on the website, and those who do need affordable and relevant technology will just go through browse the website and find the right partner to talk about. It's kind of a matchmaking. So that will be opening the opportunities for countries like SEEDS to find relevant technologies, innovations for their own development. Last but not least is the capacity building. So many of our countries find it's difficult to implement science and the goals and targets. They do not have the right professional knowledge and the personnel well trained for that purpose. So both internationally, regionally, and nationally, we are going to organize this capacity building, the efforts and also the campaigns for that. And this also be reviewed at the July high-level political forum. So I urge all the participants here, if you have some challenges you feel it's difficult to deal with, so raise your voices, let your participants and your representatives know that. They will bring to the global forum for discussions. Possibly there was some guidance or policy prepared for the future development. So I will stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Under-Secretary General Wu. So we're going to end, but I would like to give it to the gentleman at the back there. Would you be kind enough to identify yourself? Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. My name is Ashraf Al-Noor, and I am from the IOM, the International Organization for Migration. And I would like to take this opportunity to make a few points. Before I do so, I would like to thank the government of Bahamas and UNDESA for convening this important symposium and for giving us the opportunity to strengthen our partnership with the SEEDS country. That said, it's important to recall the important role that migration can play in advancing the fulfillment of the SDGs of the SEEDS countries, particularly by mainstreaming the migration-related goals and targets into their national development plans. And towards that end, IOM and UNDP developed together a guidance note to mainstream migration into development that has been circulated to many country offices around the world. Many of them happen to be SEEDS country. And to make that point, I would like to recall that the SAMOA pathway has made many specific references to migration. which relate to 8A as an opportunity as far as the contributions that diasporas and migrant organizations can make in terms of supporting the development of their countries of origin. And it also refers to migration as a challenge, specifically for people in vulnerable situations. Many of them happen to be displaced by natural disasters. We heard this morning how the frequency and the scale of natural disasters is increasingly impacting negatively on many SIDS countries, and there's something needs to be done about that. But migration is also referred to as a benefit as far as the remittances that is sent home to help families to stand back on their feet and to contribute to the meeting expenses related to education, to health, etc. And I think many SIDS countries are good examples of that. We also heard today that out of the 22 countries that voluntarily have done and accomplished their national voluntary reviews, there are 15 countries that mentioned specifically migration as one priority area for them. Many of them, again, happen to be SIDS countries who specifically refer to the need to address forced migration, again, because of the natural disasters and the vulnerabilities related to it. And B, the importance of also building their capacities for disaster risk reduction and for resilience, and that goes for many SIDS countries, but also the importance of embracing migration, not as a survival strategy, but hopefully as an adaptation strategy that can be included in national development plans. I think the bottom line here that maybe we need to give due consideration and well capture and give attention to the nexus between climate change, development, and migration, and make sure that related actions will be included in national development plans in the SIDS countries. Thank you.
Thank you, IOM. So, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, we've come to the close of a very productive day and a very robust and interactive session, which is just great. So before we close, let me take this opportunity to thank the moderators from the two breakout sessions and the two rapporteurs, and to everyone who participated. Thank you very much. I am not going to sum up the sum up of the sum up, but let me just say, I think the takeaway message is, show me the money, show me the money, show me the money. So on that note, let me invite our the representative from the host government to share some housekeeping matters. Thank you, ma'am.
Good afternoon. These will be very short messages. Just tomorrow's breakfast caucus, they're open to all members of the SIDS community. And it's really an opportunity for you to have discussions, regional discussions on common issues. They will be held on level 4, which is just above the lobby. In the 3 restaurants, there will be appropriately signposts, but that's the Black Angus, the Nikai, and the Cilantro. This afternoon, you're all invited to attend our cocktail reception. It will be held on the Escavida Terrace, which is next to the lobby. But before we go there, could we all meet by Starbucks for a photo opportunity? Thank you.
Thank you. It's over. Have a great evening. Thank you.